Atlanta in the late 80s was wide open. New highways, booming neighborhoods, projects stacked like concrete honeycombs. Dope money was flowing faster than the city knew how to count it, and everybody with a pistol and a plan saw the same thing: a kingdom. First came the Miami boys. They rolled north with gold chains swinging and gold teeth shining. In Miami, they'd already learned how to move weight, how to flood a block, and how to turn apartments into stash houses overnight. Atlanta looked like a gold mine, where they could get double the price for a key of coke and operate with less scrutiny from the law.
Miami was really flooded with a lot of drugs during that time, so it wasn't no strong avenue to get rid of the drugs. You know, everybody had drugs on every corner. So we moved towards more up north, Georgia, different places like that.
They were outsiders determined to elbow aside the homegrown hustlers. They set up shop, and as cocaine poured in, prices dropped and violence spiked. Atlanta crews realized this wasn't just competition, it was an invasion.
I remember the Miami boys came to Atlanta and started setting up shop everywhere. They was on some take your trap.
Despite numerous arrests, they became a dominant factor in dope dealing in the city, controlling drug sales in some of the city's most infamous housing projects, and setting up shop anywhere the rent was cheap and the corners were hungry. They had direct connections to South Florida's cocaine pipelines, so they flooded Atlanta with high-quality coke at rock-bottom prices that local dealers couldn't match. And if that didn't work, they used force, recalled Lieutenant John Woodard of the Atlanta Narcotics Squad. The crew was relatively small, maybe 20 to 30 core members in Atlanta, but they were organized and ruthless with weapons that easily outgunned the Atlanta police at the time. At one housing project, they ran a 24/7 open-air drug market with day and night shifts posted up in the parking lot, only letting you through if you were buying. In one incident, a dispute over the Techwood Homes turf led alleged Miami Boys leader Winston Brown to shoot a rival 8 times in broad daylight in 1987. But Atlanta wasn't empty. Local hustlers had been grinding long before outsiders learned about Bankhead or Simpson Road. Crews with roots in the city started pushing back. No talk, just gunfire, and bodies left slumped in parking lots before sunrise. The streets turned into chessboards, and every move had consequences. Atlanta's authorities were caught off guard by the onslaught. In the late 80s, city leaders were even hesitant to admit that organized gangs existed. But the carnage on the streets told a different story, and eventually the police had to act. Over the late 80s and early 90s, joint local and federal investigations started chipping away at the Miami Boys operation. By the mid-1990s, Atlanta was gearing up to host the Olympic Games, and cleaning up violent drug gangs became a top priority. The pressure worked. The Miami Boys gang was largely eliminated in Atlanta by 1996 as part of the city's effort to prepare for the Olympics. Sweeping indictments, turf battles, and task force crackdowns took down key players, and the era of the Miami Boys came to an end. But their legacy in Atlanta was already cemented. They had turned the city's housing projects into battle zones. The Miami Boys' reign was an introduction to what outside crews were capable of, but it was only the beginning.
By June of next year, Atlanta will become the first major city to have demolished all of its housing projects.
By the late 1990s, the crack boom had cooled, and many of Atlanta's notorious housing projects were demolished or abandoned. The old neighborhood-based gangs faded with them. Into this void stepped a crew that would take Atlanta's underworld to unprecedented heights of wealth and infamy. They were the Black Mafia family, better known simply as BMF.
Black Mafia!
That's right!
Led by 2 brothers from Detroit, Demetrius Big Meech and Terry Southwest T. Flannery. Unlike the Miami Boys, BMF didn't arrive ready for war. They came with suitcases of cash and kilos of coke, ready to turn the city into their corporate headquarters. Big Meech set up shop in Atlanta around the year 2000 and wasted no time building an empire. In less than 2 decades, the Flannery brothers rose from Detroit's mid-level dope dealers to kingpins of a massive, multi-state cocaine empire headquartered in Atlanta and Los Angeles. By the early 2000s, BMF was moving hundreds of kilograms of cocaine a month and pulling in millions upon millions in profit. At their peak, They had 500 employees on the payroll of their drug operation and amassed a fortune estimated at $270 million. They were so big that indictments against BMF eventually spread across Georgia, Michigan, California, Florida, Missouri, and Tennessee, nabbing nearly 150 defendants in total. BMF's influence on Atlanta was unlike anything the city had ever seen. These weren't corner boys selling dime rocks. The Flannerys ran BMF like a Fortune 500 company. Compared to the bloody battles of the Miami Boys era, the early 2000s in Atlanta were relatively calm on the surface. But behind the scenes, BMF was making Atlanta into a national hub for cocaine distribution and living like kings while doing it. If the Miami Boys brought the war, BMF brought the party. Big Meech and his crew became legendary in Atlanta's hip-hop and nightlife scene for their lavish lifestyle. They drove exotic cars down Peachtree Street, bought mansions in the suburbs, and popped bottles in VIP sections all over town. In 2004, BMF members put up billboards around Atlanta that boldly proclaimed, "The world is BMF's."
BMF got the one that was like 3 times the size of JD that sat right behind it. And that shit said, BMF, Black Mafia Family, the world is yours. I ain't gonna lie to you, when I saw that sign, I was like, oh, these niggas going to jail.
That summer, Meech rented out the entire high-end nightclub compound for his birthday bash. The event was pure excess, 6-foot ice sculptures spelling out Meech, live zoo animals, and half-naked models painted in tiger stripes mingling with Atlanta's celebrity elite. And when BMF hit the strip clubs, they practically invented making it rain. BMF blurred the line between the drug underworld and Atlanta's entertainment elite. They even started a record label, BMF Entertainment. The Black Mafia family turned drug trafficking into a kind of street dynasty, one draped in Versace and lit by nightclub strobes. By 2003 to 2004, the DEA and FBI were zeroing in on BMF. Agents intercepted a limousine in Atlanta carrying $600,000 in cash and seized an RV packed with 100 kilos of cocaine. Additionally, Big Meech was arrested in 2003 after a high-profile double homicide behind an Atlanta club, a shootout in Buckhead that left 2 men dead. He beat those charges on self-defense claims, but it put an even bigger target on his back. A decade-long federal investigation into BMF culminated on October 20th, 2005, when the feds launched synchronized raids in multiple states, arresting dozens of BMF members in one swoop. Big Meech and Southwest T were indicted, along with over 60 of their top associates. Facing overwhelming evidence, mountains of cocaine, wiretaps, informants, the Flannery brothers agreed to plead guilty to running a continuing criminal enterprise. In September 2008, they stood before a federal judge for sentencing. Both brothers, still relatively young, were hoping for the minimum 20 years after accepting responsibility. But the judge had other ideas. He admonished Terry and handed down a 30-year sentence. Meech got 30 years as well. In that Detroit courtroom, with their tearful mother and family looking on, it was the end of the Black Mafia family. By the mid-2000s, Atlanta might have thought it had seen it all. The violent turf gangs of the 80s were gone, and the flashy drug lords of the early 2000s were mostly either locked up or laying low. But a new kind of threat was about to terrorize the city, a crew with no code, no turf, and seemingly no fear. They came together in the chaos following Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when thousands of New Orleans evacuees fled to Atlanta seeking refuge. Among those evacuees were street figures who banded together to make a living through robbing. They called themselves the International Robbing Crew, or IRC, and by 2006 to 2007 they would turn Atlanta into their personal hunting ground. Many of IRC members were from New Orleans who arrived after Katrina flooded their city. In Atlanta, they linked up and embarked on a brazen crime spree, targeting anyone who had something they wanted, especially other criminals, who they figured wouldn't run to the police. They robbed dealers, kicked doors, kidnapped and tortured their victims with merciless efficiency. For a while, the International Robbing Crew moved through Atlanta almost unchecked. leaving a trail of blood that made 2007 one of the city's deadliest years in recent memory. At its most active, IRC embarked on a killing spree that police attribute to a 20% spike in Atlanta's homicide rate in 2007. They turned murder into a regular business tactic. One of the first known IRC killings came in November 2005, when Mamadou Barry, a 39-year-old businessman, walked in on them burglarizing his West End home and never walked back out. Duct-taped, hog-tied, beaten until his body gave up, and then suffocated with a plastic bag in his own bathtub. A homicide detective later saying it was the most brutal, torturous murder he'd ever seen. And that wasn't the end, just the opening chapter. A few months later, April 2006, Ryan Harmon, a young Army veteran fresh home from Iraq, got into a small, forgettable argument with two individuals of the IRC outside a nightclub. This led to Harmon later being sprayed with an AK-47 on an Atlanta freeway, killing him instantly at a downtown intersection. By 2007, the crew was so bold, they even tried extorting NFL cornerback Pac-Man Jones after a Las Vegas strip club shooting. When Pac-Man's camp didn't pay up, IRC member Edward "Slugga" Morris stepped in with threats, demanding money from Jones. In response, Jones wired thousands of dollars to a contact of the crew and left $10,000 in cash behind a suburban Atlanta Chick-fil-A as payoff to "Slugga" Morris. For nearly 2 years, the international robbing crew caused havoc in Atlanta, until it all collapsed around 2007 when APD and the Fulton County DA finally started stitching the bodies together and realized it was the same wolves every time. One case said it all. Gary Lester tried to run from an attempted robbery and jumped into a car he thought was help, only to realize too late it was full of IRC members who shot him nearly dead. And by late 2007, the hammer came down with a 60-count indictment charging 12 members with 8 murders plus robberies, kidnappings, and more. The courts handing out life sentences like death certificates.